The stars above glimmered like diamonds, their cold light illuminating the dark, desolate world below. Captain Ryland Cade sat in the cockpit of his fighter ship, scanning the horizon. He had been sent on a routine mission to scout a nearby system, but nothing was as it seemed. The mission had already gone off course. What had started as a simple reconnaissance mission turned into something far more complicated. Ryland had been a soldier for most of his life, a man of duty and discipline. But now, with no orders to follow, he was drifting through space with a sense of uncertainty gnawing at him. His mind kept circling back to the war. The Valrosians, the alien species he had been fighting against for years, had invaded human space, and there seemed to be no end in sight. But in the midst of this endless conflict, Ryland had always believed in one thing: the power of the human spirit. He believed that humanity, despite its flaws, could never be broken. As he flew closer to the planet below, something caught his attention, a signal. It was faint, almost too weak to be picked up by his ship's scanners, but there was no mistaking it. It was a distress call. Ryland's heart raced. He had been alone for too long in space, his ship drifting between battles, and the thought of answering a call for help, regardless of the source, was a distraction he welcomed. Ryland followed the signal, his fingers flying over the controls as he made his way through the thick clouds that hung like a shroud over the planet's surface. The air was thick with humidity, and a storm had begun to brew. The landscape below was wild and untamed, with towering trees and jagged cliffs that seemed to claw at the sky. It was an alien world, unfamiliar and untouchable. Yet, there was something about it that made Ryland feel at home. After a few moments, the signal grew stronger. He had reached the source. It was an open clearing, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. A soft wind blew through the trees, rustling the leaves and carrying with it a strange scent, like something both sweet and bitter at the same time. In the center of the clearing lay a figure, motionless. Ryland's instincts kicked in. He had seen death too many times to ignore it now. He brought his ship to a landing in the center of the clearing, the sound of the engines rumbling beneath him. Without wasting any time, he leapt from his ship and rushed toward the figure on the ground. As he got closer, he could see that it was a woman. Her body was sprawled out on the ground, her skin a strange shade of blue. Ryland knelt beside her, his eyes scanning her for any signs of life. She was barely breathing, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. He had never seen anything like her. She was not human. Her skin was smooth and almost translucent, her hair a long cascade of silver that shimmered in the dim light. She wore what seemed to be the tattered remains of a royal gown, the fabric torn and stained with blood. Her face was pale, her features delicate, but her eyes, those eyes, were the most striking of all. They were closed, but Ryland could see the faint glow of bioluminescence beneath her eyelids. She was no ordinary being. Ryland checked her pulse. It was weak, barely there. He could hear the faint sound of her breath, but it wasn't enough. She was dying. There was no time to waste. In a split second, Ryland made a decision. He had to act, and he had to act fast. He was no doctor, but he had seen enough wounds to know that this woman's injuries were beyond healing with the usual medical supplies. Her blood was draining from a wound near her side, and she was losing too much of it. He had to give her something, anything, that could save her life. Ryland quickly pulled off his jacket and tore at the sleeve, using it to press against the wound. His mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. Then it hit him. There was one thing he had that could help her, but it was risky. He had heard rumors, stories, about the strange connections between certain species in the galaxy, the way that blood could sometimes be the key to saving a life, even across species, but he had never seen it done. And yet he knew he couldn't let her die, not here, not now. Without another thought, Ryland unbuttoned his shirt and pulled out a small knife. His hand trembled as he drew the blade across his palm, the sharp sting of the cut sending a shock wave of pain through him. He squeezed his hand, letting the blood drip onto the ground. It was a desperate measure, but it was the only chance they had. He then lifted her limp body into his arms, ignoring the blood now staining his own clothes. He pressed his palm to her chest, the blood from his wound trickling into her veins. For a moment, nothing happened. Rylan held his breath, waiting. And then, to his astonishment, her chest began to rise and fall more steadily. Her skin, once so pale, started to take on a slight glow. But Ryland's energy was draining fast. The transfer of blood was taking its toll on him. His vision blurred, and his knees grew weak. He had already given more than he had intended, but he didn't care. Slowly, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Rylan, exhausted and on the verge of collapse, could barely hold himself upright. She looked at him, confusion written across her face. Her eyes flickered to his palm, still pressed to her chest, and then back to him. "Why?" she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Why would you do this?" Rylan smiled through the pain, his vision fading. "Because you were dying, and I couldn't let that happen." Before he could say more, the world spun around him. His strength was gone, and he collapsed beside her, unconscious. His last thought before sleep took him being that he hoped he had done enough. The world around Rylan was dark, a vast emptiness that seemed to stretch forever. He could hear the soft hum of machines, the subtle vibrations that told him he was no longer in the forest, no longer lying on the cold ground where he had collapsed. He opened his eyes slowly, his vision blurry, his head spinning. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, trapped in the aftermath of his desperate actions. But then, the reality of the situation hit him like a wave. He was lying in a bed, his body covered with a thin, strange blanket. The room around him was unlike any place he had ever seen. The walls shimmered with a soft, otherworldly light, casting eerie shadows across the floor. The air smelled faintly of flowers and something metallic. It was a sterile scent, but somehow comforting. He blinked several times, trying to focus, to make sense of what had happened. As he lay there trying to gather his strength, he heard a soft rustling nearby. His heart skipped a beat as he turned his head toward the sound. Standing beside the bed was the alien woman, the one he had saved. Her appearance was just as striking as before. Her glowing skin now shimmered brighter, and her silvery hair seemed to float around her like it was alive. She was watching him intently, her bright eyes filled with curiosity and something else, something that Rylan couldn't quite place. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rylan's breath came in shallow gasps, his body still weak from the blood he had given her. His hand instinctively moved to his side, where the wound had been. There was no pain now, no injury, only the lingering fatigue that made every movement feel like an effort. He realized with a shock that the injury he had suffered in the forest was gone. Completely healed, the alien woman took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his face. She looked different, stronger, more alive. The color had returned to her face, and her skin seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Her eyes glowed faintly, casting a soft light across the room. "You saved my life," she said softly, her voice a melodic sound, like a song from a faraway place. Rylan blinked, still trying to process the situation.
I did what I had to. You were dying."
The woman nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "But why? Why did you risk your life for me? A stranger? An enemy?" Rylan struggled to sit up, his body protesting the movement, but he did it anyway. "You were... You were in danger. I couldn't just leave you to die."
"I'm no hero, but I couldn't let that happen." The woman's eyes softened.
She seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking again. "I am Princess Lyra of the Valrosians," she said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of sadness in it. "And you are a human soldier. Our people are enemies in this war." "Why would you sacrifice so much for me?" Rylan swallowed hard. The words she spoke were true. The Valrosians and humans had been at war for years. Their battles were brutal, with no end in sight. Thousands of lives had been lost on both sides. But when he had found her, lying in the clearing, dying from wounds that would have killed any normal being, he hadn't thought about the war. He had only thought about saving her.
I guess I just couldn't watch someone die when there was still a chance,
Ryland said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper.
I didn't think about the war. I just did what I could.
Lyra seemed to understand, though she didn't speak for a long while. She simply studied him, her eyes searching his face as though looking for something. Ryland was beginning to feel uncomfortable under her intense gaze, but before he could say anything, Lyra reached out a hand and gently placed it on his chest. The touch was light, but Ryland could feel a strange warmth spreading through him at the contact. Her skin was like fire, but in a way that didn't burn. It was comforting, as though it had a power all its own. "Your blood," Lyra said, her voice quiet. "It's not just life-saving. It's changing me. I can feel it. Inside me." Ryland frowned, confused.
What do you mean? I just gave you some of my blood.
It wasn't, "I didn't think it would do this." Lyra's eyes closed briefly, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she opened them again, there was a new light in them, something deeper, something that wasn't there before. It was as though the blood that flowed through her veins had given her a new understanding of the world. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked down at her own body, as though she could feel something inside her shifting. "I feel different," she said, almost to herself. "Stronger, faster. It's as if I can sense things I couldn't before. Thoughts, memories, not just my own, but yours too." Ryland felt a chill run down his spine. "My memories?" Lyra nodded. "Your blood. It's merging with mine. I can hear your thoughts, your fears, your experiences."
I know your pain, your struggles, your victories. It's all inside me now.
Ryland couldn't help but shudder at the thought. He had heard of telepathic connections between certain species before, but he had never experienced anything like this. The idea that his memories were now part of this alien princess, that she could feel what he felt, was both unsettling and awe-inspiring.
Is it
too much?" Ryland asked, his voice heavy with concern. Lyra shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips.
No, it's
"Overwhelming, but not in a bad way."
I can hear you, Rylan. I can feel what you feel.
"And I think I understand you better than I ever could before. We are not so different, you and I." Ryland looked at her, unsure of what to say. The bond that had formed between them was beyond anything he could have predicted. He had given her his blood to save her life, but now it seemed that he had given her more than that. He had given her a piece of himself. For the first time since their meeting, Lyra took a step back and looked around the room. "Where are we? This place, it feels different, alien." Ryland glanced around as well. The room was filled with strange futuristic technology that he didn't recognize. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen in human space. The walls seemed to shift, the light playing off them in strange hypnotic patterns. It was as though they were in some kind of advanced medical facility, but it didn't look like any medical center he had ever known. "This is my ship," Lyra said, as though reading his thoughts. "It is the only one of its kind. It was made for healing, for preservation, for beings like me." Ryland raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Your ship?" Lyra nodded again.
Yes. It is an ancient vessel, built long before the war.
My people used it to travel across the stars, to heal and preserve our kind. But it was abandoned long ago, left to drift in the void. Until now. Ryland's mind was racing. He had saved a princess, and now he was aboard her ship, her ancient, mysterious ship. The whole situation was surreal. like something out of a dream. But there was one thing that stood out to him above all else: Lyra's strength. The way she seemed different now, more powerful, more aware. It was as though her connection to him, through the blood he had given, had awakened something inside her, a power that neither of them fully understood.
"We need to figure out what's happening," Rylan said, his voice steady.
"This bond between us, it's not something I've ever heard of before. We need to find out if it's going to change anything."
If it's going to be dangerous.
Lyra looked at him, her expression serious now. "I agree, but I also feel that we're not alone. There are others who will come for me. Those who will want to use this power for their own gain. They won't understand what we have." Rylan nodded. "Then we'll make sure they don't." Together they stood, both realizing that their journey had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of new discoveries and strange sensations. Rylan's body had slowly regained strength, but it still felt different. Every time he moved, he could sense the energy that had been transferred into him through the strange bond with Lyra. The connection was powerful, almost overwhelming at times. He could hear her thoughts, feel her presence, even when they were apart. It was as though they shared the same pulse, the same breath. The first time he truly felt it was one morning, as they stood on the deck of Lyra's ship, gazing out at the vast expanse of stars. It was an endless sea of light, stretching far beyond what the human eye could comprehend. For a moment, everything was quiet, peaceful, and Rylan could hear the faintest whisper of Lyra's thoughts in his mind. "You're thinking about the war," she said softly, her voice floating into his mind, like a gentle breeze. Rylan turned to her, surprised by the clarity of her words. He hadn't spoken aloud. He hadn't even meant to think about the war. But there it was, right in front of him. The heavy weight of the conflict, the endless battles that had torn the galaxy apart. His eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, it felt as though they were the only two people in the universe. "You're right," he said quietly, his voice rough with the weight of the words.
It's all I've known for so long. Fighting.
Losing, winning, it's all blurred together.
Lyra's eyes softened.
She stepped closer to him, her presence calming, even in the midst of the storm inside him. "It's not the only way, Rylan. There is more to this universe than war." He met her gaze, trying to understand what she meant. "But what else is there? What are we supposed to do when all we've known is fighting?" Lyra smiled, her expression gentle, but there was something in her eyes, something powerful, something beyond understanding. "We find another way. We find a path where we don't have to choose between life and death, where we don't have to destroy to survive." Rylan stood there processing her words. They were simple yet profound. For so long, he had been caught in the cycle of war, believing it was the only way. But Lyra had shown him something different. She had shown him a way out. He didn't know if it was possible, but something inside him stirred at the thought. As the days passed, Rylan and Lyra grew closer. They spent hours talking, learning about each other's worlds, their struggles, and their hopes. Rylan shared stories of his life as a soldier, the battles he had fought, the people he had lost. Lyra, in turn, told him of her life as a princess, her duties, the weight of her people's expectations, and the loneliness that came with it. They were different in so many ways, yet they were alike in ways that neither of them could have imagined before. But as their connection deepened, so did the strange power that Lyra had gained from Rylan's blood. It wasn't just her strength that had changed. Her mind, too, had become sharper, more aware. She could feel things, see things that she had never experienced before. The bond they shared was more than just physical. It was something far greater, something that neither of them fully understood. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's observation room, Lyra turned to Rylan, her expression serious. "There's something I need to show you," she said softly. Rylan raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "What is it?" Lyra hesitated for a moment before standing and walking to a control panel in the corner of the room. She pressed a few buttons, and a holographic display appeared in front of them. It showed a map of the galaxy, with glowing points marking various planets and star systems. "This is the map of my people's territory," Lyra explained. "But it's not just a map. It's something more, something that's connected to me now."
Rylan watched as she manipulated the map, zooming in on a distant star system.
The points on the map began to pulse, shifting and moving in ways that Rylan couldn't quite understand. It was as though the map itself was alive. "Since you gave me your blood," Lyra continued, "I've started to see things I couldn't before. The stars, the planets, the flow of energy between them. I can feel it all. And now, I can see what's coming."
Rylan frowned. "What's coming?"
"What do you mean?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes serious. "The war. The conflict between our peoples. It's escalating. There are forces within my own government who seek to use this power for their own gain. They want to control not just the Valrosians, but all of the galaxy. And they'll stop at nothing to get it." Rylan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The thought of Lyra's people being used for power, for control, it was a terrifying one. "What can we do about it?" Lyra's gaze softened, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fire that burned brighter than anything Rylan had ever seen. "We stop them, together." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in a long while, Rylan felt something inside him stir. Something more than just the urge to survive. He wanted to fight for something greater, something beyond the war. And now, with Lyra by his side, he felt like he could. They spent the next several days preparing. Lyra's ship was capable of faster-than-light travel, but it wasn't invincible. They would need allies, resources, and most of all, time. Rylan's military experience proved invaluable in planning their next move. He knew how to approach situations, how to gather information, and how to fight strategically. But what he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was how to stop the powerful forces that were coming after them. "We'll need to find a way to communicate with the other factions," Rylan said one evening as they sat together, looking over their plans. "We can't do this alone." Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I agree, but my people, they've already started to see me as a threat. If we try to contact anyone openly, it could make things worse. So, we do it quietly," Rylan suggested. "We gather information, form alliances, and strike when the time is right. But we have to be careful. If they catch wind of what we're planning, they'll destroy us," Lyra finished for him. Rylan looked at her, his gaze steady. "Exactly. We'll have to be smarter than they are. And we will be, because we have something they don't." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A reason to fight," Rylan said simply. "They're fighting for power. We're fighting for the future." Lyra smiled, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Then we'll fight together." As they continued to plan, Rylan couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose rising within him. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater. And with Lyra by his side, he knew they had a chance. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They were up against a powerful enemy, one that would stop at nothing to keep control. But Rylan was no stranger to battle, and Lyra, with her newfound strength, was more than capable of holding her own. Together, they were unstoppable. The universe, once vast and empty, suddenly seemed within reach. The stars outside the ship flickered, like distant lanterns in an endless night. Lyra stood by the observation window, her eyes fixed on the swirling galaxy beyond. Her thoughts were heavy, burdened by the weight of the decision that loomed over her. Rylan stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he too stared into the vastness of space. It was strange how quiet things had become after days of constant planning and preparation. The tension between them was palpable. both of them knowing that the time to act had come. The Valrosian fleet, a formidable force led by those who sought to use Lyra's newfound power for their own gain, was only a few days away. The clock was ticking, and every minute that passed brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation. They had no choice but to face it head on. "Rylan," Lyra spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you think we can win this?"
Do you believe we can stop them?
Rylan turned her, meeting her gaze. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was anything but. He had been fighting for so long, always hoping for victory. But now it was different. Now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something much bigger than that. It was about fighting for a future, for something beyond the war, something they both believed in. "We don't have to win in the way they think," he said. "We just need to stop them. At least long enough to give people like you and me a chance to change things." Lyra nodded, but the doubt in her eyes was still there. She knew the truth, the reality of the situation. The Valrosian forces were too strong, too many. Even with her newfound strength, she wasn't sure if they could stand a chance. But she couldn't back down now. She had seen the power that Rylan's blood had unlocked within her, and she knew that, together, they had a shot at something better. They had to take it. "I wish I could just make them understand," Lyra said quietly. "But I can feel it." The hate. The fear. "It's in their hearts, Rylan." "And I can't erase that, no matter how much power I have." Rylan placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "You're not alone in this. I'm with you, Lyra. And together, we'll make sure the galaxy sees a new way forward." She turned to look at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a rare thing to see in her, a spark of belief in the impossible. And Rylan knew that this moment, this fragile connection between them, was everything they had. The room was silent for a long time, the weight of their decisions hanging in the air. They both knew that this would be their final chance to make a difference. If they failed, the Valrosian forces would destroy everything they fought for. But if they succeeded, if they could somehow convince the galaxy to choose a different path, it could change everything. Their plan was simple. They would infiltrate the heart of the Valrosian fleet, find the leaders who sought to control the power Lyra had gained from Rylan's blood, and stop them from using it to further their war. They had a plan, but that plan had one serious flaw. It required them to trust their enemies, to find a way to end the conflict without spilling more blood. But Lyra had a secret weapon, her connection with Rylan. The bond formed by the blood he had given her. It was more than just a link between their bodies. It was a bridge between their minds, an understanding that transcended words. Lyra had learned to control her powers, to tap into the strength Rylan had passed on to her, and now she was ready to use it. As they prepared for their mission, Rylan couldn't help but wonder how much of himself was still in her, in the blood that had connected them so deeply. He had given his life force to save her, but now it felt as though a part of him lived within her, part of his memories, his struggles, his hopes. It was as though they had become two halves of a whole. The thought both comforted and unsettled him. "We're ready," Rylan said, breaking the silence. "This is our only shot. We have to make it count." Lyra turned to him, her face set with determination. "We will." Together, the ship's engines roared to life as they left the safety of their hiding place, their destination clear. The Valrosian fleet loomed on the horizon, a dark mass of ships that seemed to stretch on forever. It was a daunting sight, but neither Rylan nor Lyra flinched. They had come too far to turn back now. As they approached the fleet, Rylan's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. They would have to fight their way in, and they would likely face overwhelming odds. But the thought of fighting for something bigger than just survival, fighting for a chance at peace, gave him the strength to press forward. "We'll get close enough to board their command ship," Lyra said, her voice calm, even though Rylan could sense the storm brewing beneath her words. Once we're inside, we find the leaders who want to use my power and stop them." Rylan nodded.
"And we'll do it without firing a single shot if we can help it."
He could see the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had been ignited when they first met. She had changed since then. The weak, dying princess was gone, replaced by someone much stronger, someone who could lead, who could change the galaxy. And Rylan was there to help her do it. They entered the Valrosian fleet, their ship slipping past defenses with the ease of a shadow. The Valrosians were powerful, but they had underestimated the bond between Rylan and Lyra. They were connected now, more deeply than anyone could have guessed, and that connection gave them an advantage that no one else could see.
As they neared the heart of the fleet, Rylan's mind was filled with a single thought. This is it. This is where it all ends.
But as they docked inside the command ship, a sudden realization hit him. He didn't know if they could stop what was coming. He didn't know if they were strong enough. The only thing he knew for sure was that they couldn't fail. Not now, not after everything they had been through. Lyra looked at him, her face softening for a moment. "Rylan," she said, her voice steady, "if something happens, if we don't make it through this, promise me you'll remember what we fought for." Rylan swallowed hard. He didn't want to think about failure. He didn't want to think about anything other than the mission at hand.
But the weight of her words settled in his chest like a stone.
"I promise," he said, his voice tight. "I'll remember." Together, they made their way into the heart of the command ship, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The air was thick with tension as they approached the central chamber, where the Valrosian leaders awaited. They would have to face them, confront them, with everything they had. But just as they entered the chamber, a voice called out from the shadows. "You've come far, princess, but this is where your journey ends." The voice was cold, calculated. It belonged to one of the leaders they had come to stop. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes burning with fury. "No," she said, her voice full of power. "This is where everything changes." The battle that followed was fierce, but it wasn't just about strength. It was about belief. It was about standing up for something greater than oneself. Lyra and Rylan fought side by side, their bond fueling their every move. They didn't need weapons. They had something far more powerful, the desire for a better future. In the end, it was Lyra who made the ultimate decision. As the Valrosian leader stood before her, ready to strike, she realized something. She didn't need to fight with violence. She could end this with understanding, with connection. With one final sweeping gesture, Lyra used the power that had been unlocked by Rylan's blood, not to destroy, but to create a bridge of peace. The leader fell to his knees, overcome by the power of their connection. And in that moment, Lyra knew that this was the beginning of something new. Not just for the Valrosians, but for all of them. The war was over.